some point you have described early in your career that you suddenly felt pessimistic and despondent. And then somehow you gathered yourself back to not just renewed commitment over decades, but also a sense of hope. For the audience, can you recount some incidences which first turned you to that disillusionment and then back to the hope?
Rohini, first I'd like really to congratulate you on a wonderful event that you've organized here. I'm an inveterate attender of conferences, and I've been to the global philanthropy forums and the World Economic Forums many, many times. And I must admit that the last 2.5 days that I've been here have been the most constructive and really highly rewarding hours of my attendance. And I want to thank you for this thoughtful and very deeply well-structured event.
That's all the team.
Really,
thank you.
And your team has been terrific. Having said that, I'm not sure I'm the right person to be sharing what you call wisdom, because I don't have much. But what I would like to say is that it's not single events that change one's life as much as, a long-term sort of thoughtful commitment that you make once you realize things are not good. And the world isn't, at the moment, very good. And I'd like really to share a little bit about the concerns I have.
Can everybody hear him? Can everyone hear?
Okay. Do you want to turn up my mic? Okay. The term generation that we talked about in this event, in this session, translates in my mind to co-generation. It's really a matter of sharing kinds of experiences that we have at different times of our lives. And, my life started as a refugee from Srinagar to from Srinagar to Jammu and Jammu to Delhi. And I saw during that walk over the mountains a lot of things going on that I found very unacceptable. I was very young. I was about 7 years old. I was accompanying a younger brother and my mother, and we were running away from raiders who were supposed to essentially terminate our lives. And it was an unpleasant experience seeing the kind of poverty and deprivation on the way. And that was a pretty formative knowledge that I gained at a very young age of how the world cannot go on the way it was. Later, I was very privileged. My father was a diplomat. I got an incredible education. I went to some of the best schools and colleges and universities in the world. And I was basically overburdened by the feeling that my DNA was India. Although I loved to do the science I was doing, it was very frontier type knowledge. And actually, my professor got a Nobel Prize for the work, and he shared it with his students, including me. So it was a great time to do intellectual work, but I was always basically heading home. And when I graduated, I came home to India, and I realized that my country was a place that I couldn't be as proud of as I wanted to be. So I got very deeply involved with looking at how people's lives could be systemically changed for the better, and in a long-term, intergenerational way, how would we be able to bring about that change? Systemic change is not easy, and it doesn't come really from top. Systemic change, unless you have a Mahatma or a total crisis, you basically need a collapsing system before it changes, but people can change. So I got thinking about how would you bring about a people's movement where people put themselves in charge of their own lives. And basically, I wouldn't say that I had a particular dramatic kind of Pauline experience. All I can say is that I was really committed to doing something to bring about that change. And for me, partly because of my training, technology was a part of that change, business models were a part of that change, and essentially thinking through how people could take charge of their own lives was a part of that change. And I basically set up, after working for a while and getting sidetracked in government and in the UN, this organization called Development Alternatives, which was looking for that kind of systemic change, which I've basically been doing for the last 40 years. And
can you just give one incident before I turn to Al? In the 40 years, what are you most proud of the work of Development Alternatives?
integrity.
One, integrity.
Yes, we've never paid a bribe, and we've never been allowed ourselves to get into the corruption that we were supposed to change. And
yes.
It's a fundamental problem in our country that needs addressing, and we felt that if we played that game, then we would have basically betrayed.
And in terms of helping people to change, which is what you said you believe in, where did you see the most change? I know you work in the most remotest parts of India, but in the
places that we worked, I think we've seen fundamental, transformative betterment in the lives of women and the marginalized, young people, disabled people, marginalized people.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Al, you've been working for decades in the financial inclusion sector. What I want to ask you, Al, is how did you move towards institutionalizing some of the processes you care so deeply about? It's easy to do them inside MYRADA, but you managed to influence the ecosystem around financial inclusion. We call you the father of microfinance in India. Can you tell us, because many of the people here do worry about institutionalizing outside their own organizations. Can you take us through that journey?
You mind if I stand up?
Please, please.
I think I'm too old to sit down. Yeah. Now, looking at all these young faces here, my major concern is whether I will connect. I think we all had a great time, but I'll do my best. Okay. My niece in the States, when I said I'm talking to you all, she's in the States, she says, I'm talking to 150 people tomorrow, I'm very nervous, what do I do? So I said, don't take yourself seriously. So that's the general, if you think I'm taking myself seriously, let me know. Now, your question is very good. Microfinance, the key words are institutional approaches for the sector. What are the processes? And was it luck and timing? I think these are important things because I think the amount of innovative things I have now heard in the last 2 days, I got very involved with this whole workshop after a long time. And I think these are some of the issues that are important. What are the processes to scale up? So I'll give you a concrete example. When I started this work in 1982, much before you were born, there were two things that the government said. The Panchayat Raj was there for governance, the cooperative sector was there for development. This was the ideology. Coming from Canada and all and the World Bank, I said cooperatives. So I worked with the primary agriculture cooperative societies. You all know, all over India. I'm going to give you this example because it will remain. I used to attend the meetings. We funded them in we took up 5 in the rural area. We funded them, we trained them. I was attending the meetings, but I'm very sensitive to body language. And I knew I wasn't getting the right messages. But I lived in the village. And I also I used to share a drink of the local brew every evening. And as Nandan said, simple solutions, but you've got to get into the correct places. So I used to join them. And one evening they said, you are very nice sitting in the meetings, but you don't know what is happening. I said, then tell me. And I bought another bottle of the local liquor because philosophy in a liquor bottle is much more than in all the books of Aristotle. So I gave him this bottle. And he said, Sabha, notary, those president, secretary, and assistant, they are borrowing money from the cooperative at 7% and lending to all the poor people at 40%. Howda? Yeah. I said, does they know in Delhi, Bangalore? Nobody knows, sir. This is what. Then he told me a story. He says, they talk so much about cooperatives. We are Structured society, powered society, economically, structurally, asset-wise, we are all structured. You can't put cooperative on top of it. He gave me a story. He said the government in 1983 said, if you return your loan, you'll get double. So he said, we all went. We said, we don't have money to return. So the president of the cooperative said, don't worry, you come on Monday morning. So they went on Monday morning. What did they find? His brother was sitting at the door. And I'll give you an example only. He said, the brother asked, how much you owe? He said, 2,000 rupees. So he gave him 2,000 rupees. So he went in and paid 2,000 rupees to the president. Then the president said, now my cousin secretary is there. You go and take 4,000 rupees. So he went, he gave 4,000. Everything recorded. In Bangalore, they will say, excellent. As he was going out of the door, the brother who gave him that 4,000 said, please give me my 2,000. No, he gave him 2,000 to pay his debt, so he got 4,000. Please give 2,200. So within half an hour, he earned 200 rupees on 2,000 rupees. You know what rate of interest that is? Okay. That's about 50,000%. Now, so this is how the situation worked. And we are sitting happily with our records. Now, so what did we do? We started talking, organizing, and the groups came to talk. Poor people don't come to talk to you independently. They come in groups. So that's how the self-help group started. It didn't start as a financial institution. We told them, you make your agenda. The problem was health. The problem was this type of, because they told us, if we borrow from this cooperative, we also have to work on the fields of these big people. And in our area with red soils, you have to plow this field immediately after the rain. If you don't, it gets hard. So by the time they plow the boss's field, their field is gone. Now, these are the issues you got to talk about. Not my wife, who was used to attend my lectures in England years ago, said my talks went over her head. And she was right. It's not her fault, my fault. Because at that time, I was spouting theory. Today, she'll be happy to listen to me, but she's not come. So now, so this is the, now what happened? So that's how the self-help group started. They were first called credit management groups. Now, how did we take it to process? That's where the luck comes in. The chairman of NABARD happened to be Mr. P.R. Naik, who was previously the Development Commissioner of Karnataka, and we knew one another. So I said, look here, boss, I got something new, can you do something? And now the timing. He says, I explained what I'm having. I said, I've got these groups. He said, what are they doing? I said, they are saving. Every week they come with some money. Then I said, we are teaching them to sit. We are teaching them to draw up agenda. We are teaching them to discuss what their problems are. And he says, come and see me. So I went to see him. He said, what do you want? He said, now the timing. He said, see, I'm also not happy with the IRDP program. The recoveries are poor, it's all standardized, and it's subsidized. I want to get rid of all this. So I said, here there is no standardization. From their savings, they are lending money. One woman wants to take a pregnant daughter to the hospital, she gets some money. And MYRADA went and matched that savings. If they were very good, we gave them 4 rupees to 1. If they were not so good, 3, 1. So performance, we introduced performance. So after much, but he's very sharp. So he sent one of his officers to one of our projects. Now that gentleman happened to be in a self-help group in Holalkere, where there was a big cattle fair. And a woman wanted to borrow 4,000 to set up a idli vada shop. So she went to the money lender. He said, I'll give you 4,000. 15 days when this fair is over, you give me 5,000 back. So she went self-help group. Self-help group said, we'll give you 4,000, you give 4,100 back. So she took it. But my friend from the RBI calculated, 100 rupees, 200 rupees on 4,000, 15 days, extrapolated it to 600% interest. So he swore at me in Konkani and said, you are exploiting people. So I flew to Bombay and said, boss, that interest doesn't come to me. It remains with the group. It's not my money. He said, oh. So I had asked for 3 million rupees for 3 things. One, to train the groups in what I call institutional capacity building. You want an institution is not a mushroom. You have to spend time, blood to build up an institution. Very easy to destroy. Secondly, I want to match their savings, I said. So he gave me 1 million. I asked for 3 million, 1 million. And after so many studies, cost studies, transaction cost studies, whatnot, between 85 and 92, the government made 3 major policies, and I will stop with that, because this shows how NGO can do something. But if you need champions in the government, and yesterday when I asked this question, I think it was very polite, but the whole IT sector started without the government knowing what the bloody hell was happening. Let us face that. So, where you had champions in the government. Dr. Rangarajan was deputy governor, RBI, then he became governor. Pyara Naik was there, followed by Kottaya, followed by Nanda. These were all champions. So I asked for 3 policy changes. 1, and this is where I think you need to think about it. I said, I want the banks to lend 1 bulk loan to the self-help group after they have been trained in institutional capacity, after they have saved, after they have lent from their savings and repaid. It's a bulk loan. Now, the transaction costs of various models showed a bulk loan was the easiest, the cheapest, so that was fine. Second one, I want them to lend to an unregistered group. All hell broke loose. Law department said, who will you take to court? So I said, they are an association of persons. My Bangalore club is an association of persons. If it's okay for Bangalore club, why the bloody hell is it not okay for my groups of women? So after a fight, they had to agree. And my people said, we don't want to be registered. I had a survey. They said, we will keep all the rules. We'll keep records that our staff used to keep. Now they hire their children to keep. But we will not be registered. We'll be harassed by some petty government officer. Dr. Rangarajan, God bless him, he said, okay. He said, therefore, banks can give loans to unregistered groups provided they keep records. Third one was no physical collateral. That was not too difficult. These were the 3 policy changes, as a result of which the self-help bank, SHG bank linkage program was launched 1992. Today there are 90 million people in the self-help groups. Just 90 million people. Now most of them are women. Now, when we started, and I'll close with this, because a lot of women here, I think I should talk about that. We had women's groups, we had men's groups, we had mixed groups. What did we find? That the men were not very keen on meeting, they liked to go to the pub. But more importantly, when they took a loan, they did not share their money. They moved from BD to cigarette. Angavastram, they bought a nice silk one. So we slowly went to women, because the money was being shared. And men didn't like it. I had cases where I had to go. They would drag them out by the hair. What are they talking? We want to hear. And in Talavadi, they dragged them out by the hair. In Hosur, they threw stones. Another place, they burned the roof. But they stood by them. And that is how the women's groups developed. And then the Tamil Nadu Women's Development Corporation took the idea, and that is how it spread in Tamil Nadu, then it spread in Maharashtra and Karnataka and all over the country. So you need to have scale to work. You need processes. I've given it easy, but it was a tough job, and you need some luck.
Thank you, Al. That was a brief master class, by the way, and you can talk to him later. Sahana or Natasha is going to tell you something later about this as well. But what I take, Al told me the 3 big evils in the sector are greed, speed, and standardization. And I want you all to remember these words, greed, speed, and standardization. So a lot of the work that was done to take greed off the table, to create diversity of approaches instead of standardization, and speed, not for its own sake, but because of the urgency of the people's problems, and a deep belief in both of them in people's institutions. I want to turn to you, Ashok, about something again that must be on many people's minds, succession. In some sense, DA has been an incubator of leadership. I think many people, how many people have had something in their origin to do with DA? Yeah, several hands going up. You've been an incubator of ideas, institutions, and leadership in your work. Just tell us briefly about how that comes about. What qualities do you and your team hold to allow that to happen?
Rohini, when we started Development Alternatives, we realized that we needed to make deep structural change. Things were not good, and if they're not good, you have to change. And that needed innovation, and it needed long-term commitment. And long-term is usually longer than one lifetime. And we realized right from the beginning, my very first interview, I think, when I recruited people, was to tell them that we have a job to do. We have to create livelihoods. We've got to rejuvenate the environment. We've got to stop climate change. These are all jobs to be done. But the job of DA, and particularly my job as chairman of DA, is to build the leaders of tomorrow, the ones that will carry our message and our methods into the future. So all the way through the last 4 decades, my primary job has been to ensure that people learn how to make decisions, how to be leaders, to be able to demonstrate to others how to be responsible. So we actually had our first succession when my organization was about 12 years old. I basically went to the board and said, we now need a new set of leaders in the organization. They looked at me and said, are you going through a midlife crisis? I said, no, this is really a part of the growth plans of the organization, and I hope you will agree that we will need to put in place people who are not obviously ready, but will become ready because we give them a chance to do what they have to do. So we actually put in place the next CEOs. In fact, we had 2 CEOs, and it worked very well. Even when I was worried that a particular course of action by the present CEO might lead to a lot of trouble, I might do a little bit of Socratic discussion, asking, what are the costs and benefits and so on. But I never overruled them consciously, so that they would basically learn and become in charge. So succession was a part of that deal. And a part of that deal was a lot of investment, incredible amount of investment in team-wide interaction. Every Saturday for 40 years, we've had a staff meeting which includes all staff. And we share, it's very well structured, and we share what's going on, what needs to be done. And the amount of input from the younger staff members that you get into insights about the future is incredible. So that's a very important part. It's very costly. It takes a lot of time and effort. And my instructions are, if you want to be able to present your work, then you must do it at the very best possible level. Don't say you didn't have enough time or you didn't have enough money, you couldn't make the visuals. You've got to come with perfection and really well prepared. And so we're known globally for the fact that our staff members are very well able to communicate what they do and what they want to do, and that helps build the leaders. So if you want to leave behind an organization that carries your vision forward, then you really have to invest very heavily in terms of time and effort and dialogue with your colleagues, which we do a lot.
Thank you. And what is the most difficult part of that before I move back to Al?
Well, you end up by producing people who then find they want to set up their own organizations.
Right.
There are about a dozen of them right here, which is, I think, a wonderful contribution to the national economy, but it's very difficult for one's own organization. And so, but I'm very glad that you gave me a chance to catch up with almost a dozen of the people who started their careers in DA, which is happening.
There you go. So it's an all-teach, all-learn model, and it's a kind of incubator for good moral leader and efficient leadership. And also, you've not been afraid to let go.
Exactly. You have to, in fact, in my case, encourage them. If they've got some really driving force that they feel that they alone can do, then you support them in doing that, and we do that. Yeah.
Of all the million questions one could ask them with very limited time, I'm going to ask you to briefly respond, Al, to this. We've talked about this before, and something that bothers me, so I'm asking you for an answer. How do we stay true? How do we stay true to the constituencies that we claim to represent? And because it's easy for us because we have access to people who listen to us. But the person at that first mile doesn't. And if I'm representing him, then how do I know to stay true to him? And when will I know if my ideologies or belief systems start to diverge from what that woman or man or whoever at that first mile, their changing aspirations and my belief systems, when they diverge, how will I know that?
Okay, there are two issues. Rohini always makes my life difficult. The first is the Constitution. I'm not going to answer that first. The second is the ideology issue. How do I know that my ideologies are not in sync with myself? Very often I think my whole life, the story, yesterday I was ecstatic to hear about stories. Because I am an economist, I've dealt with case studies, facts, figures, equations, and stories are so refreshing. So,
how do you know that you are accurately representing people?
My experience has to be in sync with my beliefs and practices first. I want to make two comments. One is, she spoke about greed, speed, greed. And greed, yes, please don't misunderstand me. Make a profit, but do not profiteer. There's a big difference between the two. And that you have to keep in mind. Now, how do you close this gap between your ideologies and your thing? It's very difficult. And that is where the standardization, see, all of us come with a lot of baggage on our backs. And like I have, when I'm standing in a bus, when a young boy comes with a baggage that big, there's not much place for him to maneuver. That baggage we get from our tradition, from our status, from our education. If you want to really be involved and to listen to people, you have got to get rid of that baggage. I'm lucky. I also grew up with that baggage. But somebody said in 1971, I was studying in England, and some friends of mine said the whole NGOs got together to put money in the Bangladesh refugee program when 8 million people came to India. And I, like a fool, volunteered to run the show. So I left Oxford and went to Calcutta and ran a $200 million program. That removed this baggage from my back completely. And after that, I have remained in the development sector. So that is, we have to have some synchronization between our own beliefs and our practices. And how do you really build a culture, and this is my comment, I'll give you an example. You've heard of the Devadasis? Now, just to tell you, probably know, but they are not sex workers. They are long-term mistresses of men, and their family benefits because they pay the family. I'm just telling you this because all may not know. In 1991, government of Karnataka asked us, can you work with the Devadasis in the north of Karnataka? I said, yes. So they gave me a plan, a budget. Now, their ideology, it's not just ideology, it's strategy and time. Ideology goes into strategy and time. What was their strategy? Take all the Devadasis 200 miles away where they had land. Give them 2 acres of land, some cows and weaving machines. They were all good at weaving. I said, damn good. I have one suggestion. They said, what? I said, you put a red light in front of the place. So they said, why? I said, Devadasis they're not going to leave their home. And they did this called Gayatri Colony elsewhere. It's become a red light area. So they said, okay, what do you want to do? So I said, first I will send my staff, not your staff. But it's a dangerous job. Somebody asked me this question this morning. So please, can you make my staff government staff so that they can call the police? They agreed. So 3 of my staff became government staff. Then what happened? So they went there and said, this is the plan, let us talk to the people. And the list of Devadasis government had given them, 80% were wrong. Even the Devadasis. So after that, to cut a long story short, the entire strategy changed from resettling them to changing people's thinking, to change the culture, and to really organize the Devadasis to stop secret consecrations. So we had jatras, we got the Lingayat Swamijis on our side and they supported us. I went one night, I remember the night where this goddess Yallamma becomes a widow and we break all the bangles. So that night the Swamiji said, all of you wear bangles. So all of us wore bangles and we went. And so they began reinterpreting the whole idea of Devadasis, with the results that we have today 4,000 ex-Devadasis, and these people have their own society, government has backed them, and the first Devadasi we met in 1992 was called Sittava Jodati. She ran away, I remember. We educated her over 20 years. She became the president of this society, and in 2018 she got Padma Shri. Yes. So that's what I got. So what I'm trying to say is that the ideology and the strategy has to come from listening to the people. If you go there with this baggage, you kill people. Have I got my point across? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Continuous deep listening and continuous deep listening, immersion in whatever you are working on, and keeping your mind ready to change. Yeah? Thank you very much. A quick rapid fire question to the two of you is, and this is also important for all of us here today, do our worst fears in your experience really get realized? Do our worst fears get realized? Can sudden positive change happen? What can we do to trigger that? How can we reduce our fear? What have been your experience? I remember, I'm a little younger than you, but I remember the nuclear fear hanging over our heads. The emergency came by, so many things. But today we are not scared of those things, well, some of them. But in your experience, what would you say to this audience? Do our worst fears always get realized, or is there something we can do to alter the course?
No, I don't think they always get realized. I think we can take charge. Then, since we're into stories, give me 2 minutes to tell you a story. I have a colleague called Zinat, who was about 25 years old when she came into my room and said, India has a policy for urban habitat, but it has no policy where 3/4 of the people live for rural habitat. And I said, why don't you write one? My experience in government was that if you wanted to get something done, you didn't give an idea or a bullet points or advice, you just did it. You have to sit down and write it. And I said, Zinat, if you really want to change the way things are, make it happen. Give them a policy. They don't have any undersecretaries and people who know how to write policy, so it'll become policy. And she did. We raised some money from the Swiss government. She had 28 public hearings around the country in different districts, different sectors, different kinds of people. And 18 drafts later, we presented it to the Minister of Rural Development. And he was an RJD person, Dr. Raghuvansh Prasad or something. And he fell in love with it. He came to the next 2 or 3 hearings. He himself personally came, and it became the national policy. So to give you an example of how you can change things, I personally actually was very unhappy with the public transport of Delhi and completely changed the whole system with carrying twice as many passengers without adding a single bus. So these are things that one can do. Individuals and organizations can bring about total change if they are set their mind to it. And of course, it's partly to do with co-listening and deep listening, but depth, scale, and action are all things that civil society organizations are better at than most others. And although I'm a firm believer in the bazaar and the sarkar being able to take charge in doing things, without Samaj, it's very difficult to make that happen. And one thing I'd like to just add, there is a fundamental contradiction in what we do. What we do needs deep understanding and ingenuity and innovation, which means that our costs are determined by the global economy. We're competing for the people, which Infosys would be competing for, or we pay rents and utilities and electricity and travel costs, which are the same as any top conglomerate. But our earnings are from people who earn a few hundred rupees a day. So there is a contradiction there that you have to overcome. And you can only overcome that if civil society organizations have access to the kind of financial and other support that is patient and long run and understands that the impacts make up for the lack of financial returns. The social and the environmental impacts are just as important, maybe more important. And this is the contradiction that we're really dealing with in philanthropy, because philanthropy is the only way in which you can make up that difference between the costs and the returns. Civil society has two different ways. Social entrepreneurs are not the ones that multiply through action on the ground. They multiply by setting up mechanisms for action on the ground.
Thank you. So we have learned from deep listening to pivot. You know the word pivot. So we're not doing the question and answers. We hope you can do your question and answers with Al and Ashok during the lunch break, during the beautiful Sadha lunch that we have organized by the indefatigable Gautam. But Al, to you the same question. Should we fear the future? Does the future that we fear always come about? Or in your experience of so many decades, can change, sudden positive change happen too? Can you give an example?
Yeah, that's quite a loaded question, and I'll try to go as far as I can. The first thing I'd like to say is that, yes, both Ashok and I think, are old enough to have experienced the emergency. My house in Vasant Vihar was a staging point for students who went to Rai Bareli to canvas for a guy called Raj Narayan, who was a clown, yeah. But anyhow, we didn't mind supporting anybody. So, now I had a professor things don't go linearly in history. They go in cycles. That's the first thing. In the economy, even political history, they go in cycles. I had a professor in the UK who long ago said, the Soviet Union is going to collapse. And at that time, we did not have any data. So he said, how do you say that? He says, the women in Soviet Union have now persuaded the government to import their lingerie. So they want diversity. So once they are given them the ability to choose, that's the end of the Soviet Union. We all had a laugh. He was absolutely correct. So then he said, and I'm telling you this story, he said, we spoke about the cycles of civilization. He said, the Christian civilization rushed to the end of the precipice and fell over. The Islamic situation rushed to the end of the precipice and fell over. The Hindu civilization walked to the end of the precipice and somehow or other has managed to stay there. So, and that is true. I'm a student of history and philosophy and of Shankara also. And mainline Hinduism has never gone over the precipice. It has had place for everybody. So, the only beliefs that said we are the only people, see the biggest problem in this world are all 4 letters. So one is O-N-L-Y. Yeah, that is only. This is where the problem starts. Standardization is one expression of being only. If you're not standardized, you're out.
Homogenized.
No. So, and India has never been only. We are the only country in the world where the Jews were not persecuted. So, we have place for everybody, and if we also become like the Abrahamic religions, then we got problems. But unfortunately, we may be tending towards that. So let us hope that we will continue to remain on the precipice, and I big hope that we will remain there.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are going to close. I remember Al telling me once about 10, 15 years ago, the Maoist revolution in India is going to come to an end because the young boys want Nike shoes. And he said that's the beginning of the end. And in some sense, he was right on so many things that I've had the pleasure to listen to him. Ashok, do you want 30 seconds for closing comments?
Well, I'm delighted that you invited me. I've made lots of new friends. You know, the future lies in partnerships. And that's not naam ke vaste. It's really deep collaboration in thought and action. And if we've done anything in my organization, it's because we have literally hundreds of very active partners with whom we work very closely and deeply. And I think this is a way of developing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the two of you. I hope all of us can learn a little bit from the passion, the commitment, the intelligence, the faith, the innovation and the leadership these two have shown. Thank you so much. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.